Hello, this is David Pally, and in this video series we're going to talk about basic auto rigging using Python code. So over the 4 videos that we're going to do here, we're going to discuss how to build a basic auto rig for an arm using Python code. So here is the finished product that we are going to be working on through this video series. It is a very basic auto rig for an arm, and it is designed to take any joint system that you have here and create, whether you want an IK, an FK, or an IKFK. It can change the color of the controls, it can make preset icons to scale, you can choose the pull vector options, you can name everything. And in this script, we'll also go over how to change certain GUI options with other GUI options. So you can see here how I can use the orientation of the naming part to change the color here, how I can change the rig type, and it will remove or add certain GUI options based on what I need. And if I'll show you how to create basic controls or preliminary controls that are designed to get the initial position of the pull vector control and the overall scale. This also gives me the option to choose what type of icon I want based on the option menus that I have here. And I can get preliminary positions for certain controls, but mostly this is to get scale for the icons. I can just select the joints and finalize the arm, and we have a full IKFK switch here, all working and good to go. So in the first video, we're going to go over how to build the GUI. So how to at least create the GUI options here, not necessarily connect everything. That'll be in later videos. But the first video will go over how to create the window and add these GUI options in. So to do that, actually I'm going to leave this up just so we can get visually what we're looking for. So I have a basic Python file here in Sublime. It's all I've done is name it, give the import options here for it, and the Python options as well. So make sure we're still recording. Okay, good. And the first line of code here I have is the import panel.chorus.pm. So we'll begin from here. So the second line of code that I have here is I will explain. Well, you'll see in later videos where I'm going with this. But so the first line of code here is I'm going to create a variable for essentially the namespace for the Python file. And the reason I use this primarily is so I can pass arguments from the GUI into other functions. It becomes rather difficult when to pass arguments from the GUI into separate functions. So using the namespace here allows me to have a much easier time to pass arguments. So, and I will get into where we implement this as we go through the GUI here. So the second line of code here is what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a variable for the window, or at least for the name of the window. And the reason I'm going to do this is so that I can create, or I can delete the window if it already exists in the scene. It can replace it, and same with the window preferences. So the first thing I'm going to do is create the variable for the window. So let's call this auto arm something like that. So this is just a preset variable, and I need to create it outside of the GUI so that name already exists before I try and open the window. So first things first, we're going to create the GUI function name. And so the first thing I'm going to put inside the GUI is the option to delete the window if it already exists and the preferences if it already exists. So I'm just going to copy and paste what I have from the existing code into here, just so I don't have to spend time typing it out, and I can just show you what it's doing here. So this is an if statement, and inside the if statement, it has the command to check if the window exists. And if it does exist, which is the only option here, the next command is to delete UI, which is essentially delete the window if it already exists. And you see this variable here is the same variable I have outside of the GUI. So that's why we create it in the first place, so that we have this variable does mean something, and so this if statement can search for this window with this name if it already exists. So we have to delete UI and we have to delete preferences, or replace the preferences. So once we have that all set up, now we can actually start creating the window options here. So I'm just going to create a simple variable for the window. So pm.window, in parentheses. This is where I give the same variable that I had up here for the window. I'm just going to call this auto, or I don't really need the underscore for this, auto break. And I'm just going to give this a width of 150 and a height of 325 because that's the presets I have for this. And the reason I keep this I keep my interfaces kind of type packed here. The reason for that is in case I want to add it to other scripts, they generally all have the same kind of width settings here. And, this conserves space, so it's not a large window here. So next thing is we want the layout, because every window needs a default layout here. So give it a variable pm.column layout, and I like to give all my GUI objects names, specific names. So I'll just call this main header here. All right. So at this point, I'm going to create a show window command just so we can open this thing. So from here, now that I have the basic window, now I want to create essentially an outline for what I'm going to place inside the GUI. So, and keep in mind, I have a number of different types of GUI objects here. So I have option menus, I have radio buttons, I have icon text buttons. This is the color slider group. So I just have a number of different type of GUI options just to keep it interesting. But there is no real set way to do this. There is no single GUI option that's the best option. It's kind of personal preference here. So let's create the outline. So step one is usually what I have here, at least, is the naming option. So I'll just get this naming options, and in a case like this, I like to use the option menu here, just because, especially with the two different types of naming options I have here, it's easier to condense space if I put them right next to each other, and the option menu allows me to have multiple options kind of within this drop-down menu here. So I'll just make a note that I want an option menu there. Next, and it would help if I wrote that correctly. So the next thing I want is to set the rig type And this just like using a radio button. Again, there is no preferred option here. I just prefer the radio button. So next option here, I would have the setting the icon options. And since I have a number of icons here, again, I like to use the option menu because it kind of conserves space. Okay. Next step is to pick the color. Now, there technically doesn't have to be the color option in here. Technically, if you wanted to, you could just use the orientation to kind of determine what color you want to use. So left obviously being blue, right red, and center yellow. So you technically don't need the color. I just like having basically full control over what I want to use for an auto rig. So even if I might end up using just the same 3 colors, I just like having the option. Plus it looks nice. And it allows you to work with different types of GUI objects here. So use icon text button and color slider. And then lastly, we'll have the pull vector options. And again, I'm just going to use a radio button. All right, so now that we have the outline for what we're going to do, we're going to start to fill this out. So first things first, I like having texts to kind of show the steps, kind of illustrate what I want, or kind of just to have something to identify what is going on with each step of the auto rig. So in this case, we're going to use text here, and I'm going to call this, quotes here, naming text. I like to put suffixes for all of my naming options just in case I need to, at some point have a function that turns on and off visibility. Every GUI object has a unique name, but I like to use the suffix here for different types of GUI options, just so I can kind of organize everything. And here the label equals. Let's go. And I'm just gonna essentially just type this all out for the first kind of set of GUI options here. Or GUI objects, and then I'm just going to start copying and pasting just because it's a little faster and easier so you don't have to watch me type everything. So now that I've got that, I want to add the option menus here, but you can see that they're kind of organized. They're all in a row together. So we need to create a row column layout here to organize everything. So the texts and the option menus are different objects. So we account for the text, we have 4 objects here. So the number of columns is 4. And the column width here. And for this, we set the width for each individual column. So we have to put everything in its own parenthesis. So it's 2 columns, 40, and 450. So the total of these numbers should equal the width of the window, which is 150. So now that we have the row column layout, now we can start putting stuff underneath it, so it'll organize everything into one row. So we have, first is the text. So at this point, I'm just going to start copying and pasting here. So here's the text. So this is just the text for the orientation here. And next we're going to throw in the option menu. So option menu. I'll call this Ori menu, again, giving it a unique suffix or specific suffix there. So that's all we're going to do for now. Now, normally I'd have a command flag after this to kind of have a function that runs if I pick something like that. But for now, we're just working with the GUI here, so I'm not going to add the functions just yet. So now that we have that, now after the option menu, I can start adding the menu items here. And what the menu item command does is each option for the option menu has its own menu item command. So we're going to populate the option menu with different menu items. So I'll just, in here, I'll just put label equals, say, left, like that. And we'll just copy and paste this for center and right. And the menu item command doesn't adhere to the row column layout, so I can have however many of these as I want, but they have no impact on the column layout. The next item, or the next command that I put in here after the menu item will be the next object that fills the row column layout. So with that done, I'm going to just add the rest of the code here that I had. So this is the label text and the label option menu here with the two menu items in here. With that, now we need to kill the row column layout to get back to the main layout, and we do that with a set parent command. And I'm just going to use the variable for the main column layout there. And then after that, I'm just going to add in a separator command just so I can kind of keep things separate here. And I'm just going to call this name separator, width equals 150 and height equals 5. Okay, so that's it for the naming options for now. So we'll move on to the radio button that we're going to use to set the rig type here. So I'm going to just copy and paste in the text for step 2 right there. And now we're going to add in the radio button command. So I'm just going to copy and paste because there's a lot in here. So we're going to bring this in here. Oops. Let's kind of reorganize that a little bit. There we go. So this is the radio button group. This is going to give us the 3 radio buttons here. So you can see, gave it a unique string name, label array 3. So we have 3 radio buttons here. So we need to name each of them or give a label for each of them. So that's what these are. This determines the number of buttons. This is the column width for each button, which should match the width of the window. And just what do I want the default button to be selected. In this case, I just put it to IKFK because that's the most common one I use. And that's pretty much it for setting the rig type with the radio button. There's really not much else we need to do. So we can just move on to the next thing. So I'm just going to throw a quick separator in there. So we'll move on to the next one. So now we're going to set the icon options here. And again, we're using option menus, and it's organized using a row column layout. So that's going to be the first thing we paste in here. So we've got the text for step 3. And here's the row column layout. So it's just a 2-column thing, and however many objects I add will just fall under 2 columns here. So I'm going to bring in the text and the icon menu, and the option menu in here. So this is the text for the first one and the option menu. And after that, we'll bring in the menu items here. So this is the option menu for the IK icon style. So picking out which style I want here. Here are the 3 options that I have for that. And we're just going to keep going. So next up, we have the FK icon style here. And here are the menu items for that. And we'll keep going. So we got the option menu for the hand icon. Let's add the menu items for that. And we'll bring in the pull vector after that, and the pull vector options. And that's really it. So these are the 4 option menus. These are the objects, or essentially the names of the controls I want to switch between. And we'll just throw, actually, I can just copy and paste it here. We'll kill the current row column layout with a set parent. And then right after that, I want to have this button just to actually run the preset icons command. So we'll run that here. So this will just create the preset icons based on what I have in here. And lastly, we'll throw a separator. So I'm just going to copy this one, paste it in here, and I'll call it style. So as you can tell, I have a tendency to copy and paste lines of code that are repeating. It's just a very easy way to save time. As opposed to typing everything out, you'll find that you'll end up doing that quite a bit. So now we pick the icon color. So here is where we get into the icon text buttons. So these are how we create colored buttons here. So first things first is we're going to bring in the text for step 4. And the layout that we're going to do here for these icon text buttons is a grid layout, just because these buttons can all be the same size. So having the grid layout allows them to be uniform. And I can also determine how many columns and how many rows I want to have here, which I can't really do with a row column layout. Row column layout, you either have to pick however many columns you want or however many rows you want. You can't pick rows and columns at the same time. So we're just going to use the grid layout here, and determine number of rows is 1, and number of columns is 5. And again, depending on how many colors you do want in here, you can add however many rows or columns you actually do want. So I just picked 5 because these are the 5 most common colors I use when coloring controls. So, and lastly, for the grid layout command, we're going to just pick these, or set the cell width and height. And in here, I'm just going to put 30 and 20. So 30 units across and 20 units high. And so now that we have the grid layout set up, now we can add the icon text buttons. So icon text buttons. Oops. There we go. And the first one is going to be a dark blue color, so I'm just going to call this dark blue button, and I'm going to give it a custom background color. This is how we're going to give it the color that it has. Unfortunately, we have to use decimal points. We can't really use whole numbers here. And they're very specific numbers that you kind of just have to figure out for yourself. And that's pretty much it. So I'm just going to copy in the rest of the buttons here. So this is light blue. And this is brown. Trying to go as fast as I can here. This is red. As I'm sure you can guess, these numbers are just essentially combinations between RGB. And this is yellow. Okay, so now we have our icon text buttons here, so we can kill the grid layout at this point. And now we need to add the color index slider here. So let's bring that in. Color index slider group. And I'm just going to call this arm color. I don't really have a suffix for it because it's the only one of its kind in this script, so I didn't really need to give it any sort of specific suffix there. And I'm just populating this with. So I just gave it, as you can see, there's really only one object in here, but I think this is just kind of what I had beforehand. I just gave it, it asks usually for 2 objects with the color index slider group. And since I only really have one, and I don't need a label or anything like that, I just make the first column 150, the width of the window, and the second one 0. So now we got min equals 0, max equals 31. So this is just the number of colors in the color slider, which if you're familiar with drawing overrides is that slider you use to change the color. So there's 31 values for that, but I'm getting used to this new touch bar thing. So you can set it to whatever number you want based on what colors you do intend on using. So the yellow button, I believe, has a value of 17 and the color index slider, so you can set the max to 17 if you want. I just set it to 30 because that's 31 because that's just the max number there. And I'm going to set value equals to 7 because I usually rig the left side of first, and that's usually blue. So, all right, so that's our color index slider, and that's pretty much all we need for coloring the controls part of the GUI. So once we have that all set, and we'll just move on to the last part here, which is setting the pole vector, which is just a radio button. So I'm just going to quick copy and paste the code in there. So this is the text for step 5. Here's the radio button. Give it a unique name. It's the label array 2 because there's only 2 options here. Number of buttons 2. Here's the width of each. Select the option to 2, which is pole vector because I use that by far a little bit more. I'm going to get rid of the command for now because we'll go over that command in the next video, adding commands to the buttons. And we've got the separator here. So the last thing we need is just this final button here to finalize the arm. So I'm just going to copy and paste the button line of code that we had there. And I'm just going to call this the final button. And we'll just type out finalize the arm because that's what we have in the example here. And that's pretty much it for the GUI. This is all we really need to populate our GUI for the arm rig. So what I'm going to do is just test it just to make sure it works. So I'm going to save it here. And we're going to bring this into Maya here and run it just to see, make sure it runs without an error. And there it is. So we're all set on the GUI. In the next video, we're going to go over how to connect the GUI to change either visibility or change color. We're going to connect the commands of option menus and radio buttons and things like that to affect other GUI objects.